Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he's wearing the tightest pants this side of Walker Bueller. It's John Precoda.
Hello there, Raphie. I'm just saying, when you have an ass like mine and Nick Martinez's, you gotta wear those tight pants.
That's right. You've invoked his name. It's America's ass. It's Thick Martinez. It's Big Dick Nick. It's the man, the myth, the legend, Nick Martinez, one of the most exciting, dynamic pitchers playing for the Padres right now. So we're going to get into a deep dive on Nick, his career, his path to the team, his transformation, and what the future potentially portends for him. Before we do that, of course, we hope you're watching on YouTube, Padres.com, Padres Hot Tub YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/Padres Hot Tub to find us there. You can subscribe. You can like our videos. We'll have more coming down the pike soon. Not just these videos, but of course, the Padres Hot Tub main podcast. You can become a Patreon member to listen to this ad-free and get it in your podcast feed a couple days early. That's patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub, starting at just $5 a month. Not only will you be getting the show ad-free, you'll be joining our wonderful Discord community. You'll be able to talk with John and I about Pods Above Replacement. And finally, comment on this video, like this video, and tell us who you want to see next. You know, this is our third episode, and I think we're starting to get into the swing of things, and we have some interesting ideas for what we want to do next. But for now, like, subscribe, comment, participate. Let us know what you think. And with that, let's talk about Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez, one of the newest additions to the Padres, coming in between the 21-22 seasons, signing a really interesting deal that was structured in much an AJ Preller way and paying dividends. So, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about Nick Martinez before he ended up in San Diego?
Nick Martinez, yeah, this is going to be a good one. Nick Martinez is one of those great variables on the Padres for this year. Who knows what Nick Martinez is? We'll try to figure that out through the course of this episode. So before Nick Martinez ventured out to Japan, he was drafted in 2011 by AJ Preller's Rangers. Of course, he's on the Padres, so of course he was drafted by AJ Preller at some point in time. He was drafted in the 18th round out of Fordham, so he's like kind of a deep dive prospect that AJ Preller was able to unearth. And he made it to the major leagues by 2014 as a 23-year-old. So making it to the major leagues as a 23-year-old when you're a 18th round pick is pretty impressive. You know, he had a pretty quick rise to the majors considering that he was a lower draft pick. Not as sexy of a pick. He was more of a pitchability stuff than a stuff guy coming out of Fordham. Made his debut in 2014, and then over the next 4 years, I didn't realize how long he had pitched with the Rangers. 4 years, consecutive years of pitching for them, and 415 innings pitched. So that's a pretty big sample size that he had over those 4 years. He was going back and forth between AAA and the majors. He was optioned to 13 separate times during those 4 years before he was eventually non-tendered in 2017. So there is some good information on Nick Martinez before he ended up going to Japan, but it's not great information. He was 450, or like I said, 415 innings pitched, but he had a 4.77 ERA and then about the same FIP. It was even higher, 5.36. And he was only K'ing people at a 5.14 Ks per 9 rate. So like I said, more pitchability than stuff. He wasn't really getting people to swing and miss basically ever. And he was having mediocre results. He was getting innings, which is, you know, a good thing to have at the major league level, just somebody who can pitch innings, but they weren't good innings. And then he ran out of his options, so the Rangers were feeling fine to non-tender him, and so in the 2017 season, or after the 2017 season, he was non-tendered and he went to Japan. And then, going to Japan, he was basically the same pitcher, except probably against a lower quality of hitter in Japan. Japan's probably closer to like AAA or quadruple A in terms of quality overall, which led to him having a lower ERA in the 2018 season. It was a 3.51 ERA. But about the same in terms of K per 9, 5.17 Ks per 9. That's not sexy. That's not going to bring you back to the major leagues. So he had 161 innings that year, 161.2 innings in 2018 of that 3.51 ERA. And then in 2019, 1 year later, there was this virus that hit the world. I've heard it was upsetting to people, and folks didn't allow baseball to be played in 2019 in Japan. So Nick Martinez, being the studious man that he is, said, I can't just waste this year playing Call of Duty. I need to go learn myself how to be a better pitcher. And so he took both the Rapsodo and Driveline online courses, got his certificates in both of them. And he said that he learned a lot. He said that he, as a pitcher who used to be a position player, had a little bit more of a straight up and down stance. He'd kind of throw in the same manner that a shortstop might throw to first base. And that straight up and down stance, without getting that real drive towards the plate, was costing him in terms of velo. And then also his pitch shapes were nothing to be desired. They were pretty much basic average pitches, which weren't fooling folks. So he gained those two things by taking those courses, an ability to kind of get more drive, more velo on his pitches, and then also a little bit of shape design, which was really good for him. In the 2020 season, he did not perform much better in terms of ERA. He had a 4.62 ERA, which is even worse. But he did, over those 76 innings, so a small sample size, start to increase his Ks per nine. So they went from the 5.17 that I said to 7.82 Ks per nine. And then keep learning. He keeps learning how to attack people, changes his changeup grip after the 2020 season. Then, in the 2021 season, things start getting sexy at that point. He has 140 innings, so good sample size, of a 1.60 ERA in 2021 in Japan.
I'm told that's good. That's good.
A 1.60 ERA. That'll play with basically any level. And yeah, Japan, like I said, is closer to like AAA, maybe quadruple A. So that's, if you're putting up a 1.6 ERA in AAA, even that's a good number to be posting, especially over 140 innings. And then his Ks per nine went even higher. So then they went to the 8.83 Ks per nine. So that's the kind of, Ks per nine that'll get you back over to the major leagues once you go to Japan. But he also had something that was very sexy to a lot of people, which was a very dominant appearance in the Olympics in the year 2021. He went 11 innings for the United States in their silver medal run. And in those 11 innings, he only gave up 2 runs and had 16 Ks. So much, much, much more dominant than he had been in his previous United States experience. He caught the eye of everybody who had seen him before. So what did they see when they saw him in that Olympic medal run? They saw an increased velocity on his fastball. Fastball went up from about like 92 and a half to closer to 94 miles per hour. Not only that, but with his improvement in pitch shape that he got from those courses, it had more rise on it. So it just performed better in terms of both velocity and the shape of the pitch. Not only that, but in Japan, he realized that his changeup shape, which is now his best pitch, was very mediocre. Not only that, but his change in velocity from his fastball to his change was much too small. So he was throwing a changeup that was only about 6-7 miles per hour slower than his fastball and had a similar shape, which meant that basically his changeup was just a bad fastball. And hitters could pick up on that. He was basically only fooling people who were looking fastball and then got confused by their shape change. But if you were more of that like just read and react type hitter, you could smash his changeup because it was just a bad pitch. So he tried to go with a splitter because he was in Japan, and Japan was the splitter capital of the world. But he said that he couldn't get good enough extension on his first and second, or his index and middle finger. So he wasn't getting good like normal splitter action on his splitter. Instead, it was like more of a cutter. But he also he already has a cutter, so there's no need for him to use that. So instead, he went to more of like a Vulcan change, where he went between his like third finger and ring finger. And at that point, boom. His analysis of his changeup was very exciting to him. He suddenly had a closer to like 13 miles per hour difference between his fastball and his changeup. And then also the pitch itself would drop a lot more, which made it a very big change from his fastball. which made it dive more and at a slower rate. So now they're completely different pitches. Unless you're looking specifically for the changeup, it's going to be hard to hit it. So that combined with just some work on all of his pitches, his cutter had different shape, his curveball had more spin and a bigger drop to it and had a higher whiff percent. Overall, he basically just became a better pitcher, more velo, better shape on all his pitches. He now has a new best pitch, which is his like Vulcan changeup. Now he's a completely different pitcher.
So that obviously catches the attention of AJ Preller, and it's worth noting that Nick Martinez wasn't the only player to be coming over from Japan in after the 2021 season. Robert Suarez was also playing in Japan at that point and posting similar like just over 1 ERA over a pretty decent sample size in innings. Suarez, of course, is a reliever instead. He was like Japan's most electric closer in their baseball league. So it's worth noting that the Padres scout this area well. They scout Japan well. Obviously, they have feelers in Korea as well. So it comes time to try and court Nick Martinez to come over to the Padres, and he was given a contract that I think was controversial, to put it lightly, at the time. Wouldn't you say, John?
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, we had no idea who Nick Martinez was. We just knew that he had one good season in Japan. And so he comes over here, and he's obviously a little bit of a risk. And we gave him a 4-year, $25.5 million contract with the first year $6 million guaranteed and an opt-out at $1.5 million after that season. So basically guaranteeing him $7.5 million, which is a decent amount of money for a person just straight coming over from Japan with only one, successful season. But the part that made the contract a little bit controversial is that if he was good, we gave him $7.5 million and he opted out. And if he was bad, we gave him $25.5 million and we just had to suffer through him for 4 years. Probably, I mean, we might have DFA'd him or just got, not high quality results. But the gamble paid off. AJ Preller was, he must have known what he was doing a little bit, or at least thought there was a high percentage chance that he would at least be a good reliever, if not a good starter. Because he did end up opting out, so he got his $7.5 million that first year, and then he signed a new contract, somewhat similar, a little bit different. Now it's 3 years and $26 million guaranteed. Similar in that he has that first year guaranteed, this time at $10 million. But then AJ Preller did that thing that he seems to be doing now, where he gives himself and the player an option at lower and higher levels. So basically after this season, after he gets his $10 million, we have an option to extend that for 2 more years for $32 million total, so $16 million a year. And if we decline that, he then has the option to take a 2-year, $16 million option. And what that does overall, since only player options are counted against the average annual value of a team, it makes it so that he is only taking up 26 divided by 3, so a little bit over $8 million per year against the annual average value, despite the fact that he could potentially make a lot more than that. It is a interesting contract. It makes it so that it's not a huge risk. The worst that could end up happening if he's bad is that we pay him $26 million over 3 years, and he's probably not going to be so bad unless he gets hurt that he's not worth about that. But it does give him an opportunity to now opt out after next year. If we don't want to do that 2 years, $32 million, he can either get a little bit less than that or just, hit the free agent market and value himself to 29 other teams.
So, yes, like you mentioned, AJ Preller becoming kind of known for this type of contract. Michael Wacha obviously being signed to a very similar deal that sees each side trading options, all in an effort to lower the average annual value in terms of cap hit. So, really interesting story for Nick Martinez. Obviously going overseas, and a lot of Americans that go to Japan, they'll go for like a year, 2 years. He was there for 4 years, and had a pandemic in between and everything, and even had weaves and bobs over his arc just in Japan alone. So one of the great things about Nick Martinez is that when he was pitching for the Rangers was right when the advent of StatCast came along. So we have StatCast data from earlier on in his career. From 2017 is the year that I pulled, just because I think it shows it's his last year in America before going to Japan. It's also kind of his least impressive season in a way. And, we really see kind of the evolution of who Nick Martinez used to be. So 2017, he throws 111 innings, and he puts up a 5.66 ERA. So, no way you cut it. It's bad. What's particularly striking about this, though, his strikeout rate was only 14% in 2017, which was in the bottom 5% of the entire league. So he was only walking 5.9% of batters, but he's only striking out 14%. And what that kind of tells me is that, he's a finesse pitcher who didn't really finesse. He's someone who was trying to, like Kyle Hendricks, for instance, or Zach Davies, induce contact, but induce soft contact, not necessarily trying to overpower guys and strike them out, but trying to produce a lot of ground balls and, get some outs. His hard hit percentage, again, that's contact that's over 95 miles an hour, was only 30.4%. So that is a career low, actually, compared to his numbers, even including last year. But he was just giving up lots of hits and lots of home runs. I think his home runs per 9 rate was over 2 that year, which is like dreadful. So 2022 comes around. He throws 106 innings, so about the same sample size. His ERA is 3.47, so a full 2+ runs lower. His strikeout rate, 21.2%. So again, he's going from 14% in 2017 to 21.2% in 2022. So a precipitous rise, a 50% rise. And something I thought was interesting as well, his walk rate goes up about 50%, 9.2%, compared to 5.9 in 2017. And what that says to me is that Nick Martinez is willing to nibble a little bit more. We're not going to get too deep into kind of the pitch plus, stuff plus. We'd love to talk about that in the future. But one of the things that those advanced metrics show us is that Nick Martinez is a location first pitcher. He's going to command his pitches very well. And his stuff is not necessarily going to be the most overpowering, but he does have a really good command of his pitches. He knows where they go, and he's willing to put them there. So, like we said, he strikes out more. And one of the most interesting aspects of his year last year, his left on base percentage. This is basically the amount of runners that get on base who get left on base and don't score in the inning versus the amount that do score. His left on base percentage was 80.8%, which is 12th in the majors, which is like, obviously this is a minimum 100 innings thrown. There's hundreds and hundreds of pitchers who reach that threshold. And he's sitting in the company of Shane McClanahan and Justin Verlander in that category. Like, this is, it can be a little bit of luck, but it can also, because you obviously have guys on base, but it can also show the ability just to like get out of jams. And I think that was something when you were just looking at the eye test of Nick Martinez. He was a guy who would come into games. He was the fireman, especially when he was a reliever. He'd get out of jams. But even when he was starting, I remember, fourth, fifth inning comes around. He's going second, third time through the order. And it just seems like so many guys are getting on base, but he induces that double play ball. He induces whatever. And it's kind of like the most idealized version of Nick Martinez. And John mentioned this in talking about his transformation. Nick Martinez goes to Driveline, and for those that aren't familiar, Driveline kind of was the revolutionary company. Was it Kyle Bodie he was the Reds pitching coach, I think, a while ago? He started it. Probably butchered his name, but he, when you see, for instance, pitchers throwing like weighted balls, that was something that Driveline kind of revolutionized in terms of like trying to increase velocity. So they were also really early on in the spin rate game, which is something that obviously we heard a lot about in Major League Baseball when it came to sticky stuff. And that whole controversy was that spin rates were spiking. Nick Martinez, pitch by pitch, his changes from 2017 to 2022 is like a fascinating case study because it shows someone who really took their craft and honed it and studied himself and tried to figure out what was working and what didn't. So in 2017, Nick Martinez threw his four-seam fastball 38.1% of the time. In 2022, that number drops to 26.3%. So that's a huge drop right there. His mile per hour, kind of like John was saying, he throws the ball a full tick harder. And one of the things that we'll see over the course of all of his pitches is that the whiff percentage, meaning the amount of times players are swinging and missing on those pitches, is up on every single one of his pitches. His fastball, his changeup, his cutter, his curveball, and his sinker. Some of the highlights about the pitch difference is his changeup goes from a 15.9% to 6%. So more than doubles. And, this is something that matches the eye test if you were watching Nick Martinez. Like, his changeup just felt like this unhittable pitch that felt Martinez is that the spin rate on all of his pitches moved about 50 to 100 revolutions per minute in the right direction for each pitch. So, for fastballs, you want a higher spin rate. So that the fastball went up about 60 RPMs. For changeups, you want a lower spin rate because the spin rate is what's going to keep the ball in the air, and you want changeups to fall off the table. And so you were able to see Nick Martinez change his pitches to move the right way in each direction in terms of spin rate, which shows someone who's incredibly intentional and incredibly studied. And I know, John, you took kind of a further look into Nick Martinez kind of in two parts last year as a starter and a reliever.
Yes, I did, and it's interesting his profile. This kind of gets into the meat of who is Nick Martinez. That's kind of what we're trying to figure out in this podcast. And the reason why it's interesting and not straightforward is because he had a tale of two halves last year. He had a first half wherein he was predominantly a starting pitcher, and he was an okay starting pitcher. He wasn't great. He was probably a little bit below average. As a starter, he had a 4.30 ERA and a WOBA of 3.59. I said in the Trent Grisham podcast that the average WOBA is about 3.20. He was 3.59, so that's a full standard deviation worse than average as a starting pitcher. But when he goes into the relief aspect in the second half, he suddenly is fairly dominant. He has a 2.67 ERA. He has a 2.68 WOBA. So 2.68 versus 3.59. That's almost a 100-point drop in his WOBA, which is a large drop. So you could say, oh, he's great as a starting pitcher. He's bad as a reliever. However, the confusing part about Nick Martinez, the thing that makes it a little bit double variable, is that when he switched to becoming a reliever, he also changed his pitching profile. And why that's important is because as both a starting pitcher and a reliever, his pitch that was getting hit the hardest was his four-seam fastball. And so his four-seam fastball, just to put some numbers on it, he gave up a 351 batting average against on his four-seam fastball and a 675 slugging. So that's just slugging. That's really bad. His WOBA against was 461. Remember, 320 is average. So if you put it on like an on-base percentage scale, if somebody's getting on base at 461, that's like Barry Bonds. So basically everybody's Barry Bonds against his four-seam fastball. And when he goes to the relief, when he becomes a reliever in the second half of the season, he drops its usage. Not only that, but it gets a little bit faster, so it's a little bit better of a pitch, and also he doesn't use it as much because it was getting smashed. So the question is he better as a reliever because he just has to face folks one time through an order at most? Or is it that he was learning on the job and he's a very studied person, so he's probably every month, taking in the data that he's given and saying, oh, this pitch is not performing well. I need to either change it or abandon it. And did he become a better pitcher at the same time as he switched to relief? He steadily, even as a reliever, started using his four-seam fastball less and less, and his results were better and better. Not only that, but you can see in his playoff game against the Phillies, wherein he was a pseudo starter. He wasn't a starter, but he had 3 innings against the Phillies. He used his four-seam fastball a total of 5 times the entire game, so only 12%. And earlier on in the season, he was using it like 35, 40%. So he clearly, in the important situations, he knew not to go to his four-seam fastball. So the question is, who is he going forward? When he's a starting pitcher, does he need to use his four-seam fastball more often than he would out of the bullpen? The answer is probably yes. He probably does need to use it in order to just have his pitches have more variability in general, and also for tunneling pitches. So his curveball is a really good pitch. It has very good results against his WOBA against his curveball was 236 last year, which was bested only by his dominant changeup that we talked about. If you're not throwing a four-seam fastball at the top of the zone, then a curveball is a little bit less tricky. So he probably needs to throw that four-seam fastball at the top of the zone at least once in a while. Not only that, but if it was you coming to the plate against Nick Martinez as a starting pitcher last year, what would you have done? What would your strategy have been? It probably would have been to look at the top of the zone for that four-seam fastball that you know you can hit, and then try to spit on most of his off-speed pitches. If you're seeing him 2 or 3 times through an order and suddenly he's not throwing that four-seam fastball at the top of the zone and you're only looking for an off-speed pitch, your whole approach changes, right? You're not if you're not looking for that four-seam fastball that you know that you can hit, then you're going to be looking for something else, and maybe you'll suddenly have more success against his sinker now that he's throwing it more. Maybe you're looking for a changeup. Maybe you're saying, oh, he throws a lot of first pitch curveballs now. I can just, watch for that and try to hit it. So things are just going to be different this year than they were last year. Both the fact that he's a starting pitcher and that his repertoire is just probably going to be different. But it's going to be exciting to see. I would venture to guess that probably he's going to either reduce his four-seam fastball usage in the year 2023, or he's going to come to the majors this year and we're going to see completely different shape on it. Because it could have been that this offseason he said, well, I need to get that four-seam fastball back on a usable level. And right now it's a 94 mile an hour pitch that has a very average shape. Hitters come up here looking for it. I need to change the shape on it. I need to do something that makes it different. And so it could be that he does that. It could be that he decreases its usage overall. But there's probably, I would venture to guess that there's probably going to be a difference between him this year at the start of the year and him in 2022 at the start of the year, because he is a learned starting pitcher and he knows that he had some issues at the beginning of last year.
So one thing I wanted to touch on for some folks that you mentioned, tunneling. This is a concept that's, I think something that is been intuitive in baseball for a long time, but it's like really taken off again as people have focused a little bit more on spin rates and everything. But the idea behind it is that you want your pitches to look the same when you're delivering them. You want your four seamer to look like your curveball when you're releasing it, so that basically the pitches look the same as late as possible when they get to the plate. And that's why, Pitching Ninja on Twitter, Rob Friedman, has some like really good overlay videos where he'll overlay a fastball and a curveball from, some of the best pitchers in baseball. And you'll see, maybe 15 to 20. And then all of a sudden, one goes straight and the other breaks hard to the left. And like that is what makes the best pitchers elite, is the ability to kind of mask and camouflage their pitches as being the same. And so for Nick Martinez, the idea is to make that changeup and to make that curveball look just like his fastball. Because not only is it going to make those secondary pitches stronger, but it's going to make the four-seamer stronger. Because if all of a sudden you have to wait on and figure out which of those pitches are coming, you're going to have less time to react. I know, we had an instance last year with some pitchers that shall not be named that started certain playoff games in Philadelphia and did not record an out. And, there were shouts at the time for Nick Martinez to be starting that game in the first place. And in a way, he did. He did start the game in the first inning with no outs. However, I think there were 4 runs on the board at the time, maybe 2. I can't remember. Anyway, Nick Martinez came in in relief in the first inning of NLCS Game 4. And John, I know you looked closely at that performance, so if you could break that down for us.
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit before that he dropped his four-seam usage in that playoff matchup. This aspect of him is what makes me actually excited about him for the future. Because, so what is Nick Martinez? He is either a back end of the rotation starter or a pretty good reliever. You know, he's one of those two things. He's probably not a bad back of the rotation starter who's also a bad reliever. So when he was pitching those 3 innings, like I said, he dropped his four-seam usage. He used a lot more curveball, a lot more changeup. He used his sinker a lot more, and it was obviously very effective. That's what made Real Muto say in the WBC that we need this guy to come over because he's, nasty. And it's because he was throwing his best pitches quite often. So the exciting part about Nick Martinez to me is that he transitions we're a playoff team now. He transitions to the playoffs much better than our teams have in the past. So I don't know if you remember in 2020 in the year 2020, AJ Preller clearly went heavily into the bullpen game strategy. He was trying to pick up on what the Rays were throwing down, wherein he was excited to do more bullpen games when it came to the playoffs, which is a good strategy if you have the arms for it. At that time, we had no starting pitching, basically, and that was partially due to injury. But we couldn't do a bullpen game every single game. That's ridiculous. You're not going to be able to pull that off through the entirety of the playoffs. So then in 2021, he says, all right, we didn't have enough starting pitching. Let's get more starting pitching. And he did. He got more starting pitching. However, the end of his rotation were not arms that transitioned well into the bullpen once you narrow your starting rotation down to like 3.5 guys for the playoffs. And that's why Clevenger and Minaya were not good solutions to both starting pitching and then a new playoff role. It seems pretty clear to me that AJ Preller wanted to get a little bit of both this year. He wanted to get people who could contribute innings during the regular season, but then also transition to the bullpen well in the playoffs. That's what Lugo is probably going to do. That's what Nick Martinez is probably going to do. And if they are used in the playoffs, I would bet that it's probably one time through the lineup. It's probably 2 to 3 innings. And we can shift to that like pseudo bullpen game strategy, wherein they're throwing their best pitches. Nick Martinez is primarily going with his curveball and his changeup, and Seth Lugo is snapping off as many of those curveballs as he possibly can, just one time through an order. And that's going to transition really well into the playoffs. So that is something that I'm excited about overall.
So not only was Nick Martinez a player who was in transition from Japan into America, from starter into reliever, but he also seemed to be 2 different pitchers depending on the handedness of the hitter that he was facing. Reverse splits, reverse platoon pitchers we've seen where it's like, righties should throw better against righties, but sometimes they throw better against lefties. And we'll see kind of that approach change. But Nick Martinez was a remarkably different pitcher against righties versus lefties. And I know you dug into some of that, John.
Yeah, this is super fun to me. He's essentially 2 completely different pitchers depending on whether he's playing or facing a right-handed hitter or a left-handed hitter. And conventionally you think that it'll be a regular platoon and you'll be a little bit better against right-handed pitcher or right-handed hitters when you're a right-handed pitcher. But sometimes there's, like you said, that reverse split. He was neither and kind of both. When he was facing right-handed hitters, he was very similar to the pitcher who he was in 2017, a better version of that pitcher. He had, against right-handed hitters, 6.4 Ks per 9, which is not good. 6.4 Ks per 9, but he also limited his walks against them, and he also got poorer contact against right-handed hitters. So against left-handed hitters, his Ks per 9 went up to 9.99, which is great. But also his base on balls went up to 4.44 against left-handed hitters. So overall, you had, against right-handed hitters, low K rates, but also poor contact. And against lefties, you had more K rates, but also better contact and more walks. And how it ended up evening out is that basically it was the same pitcher against lefties and righties. I mean, very different, but same results. So his slash line against lefties was 225, 316, 401. And then slash line against righties was 251, 314, 395. WOBAs were almost exactly the same. There was 318 against lefties, which is, like I said, very close to average. And against righties, it was 312, which once again is very close to average. So why is that? Why is he such a different pitcher depending on the handedness of the batter against whom he is pitching? I dug into that, and the reason why is because he varies his repertoire dramatically depending on who he's facing. So against right-handed hitters, he throws basically his three worst pitches much more often. He throws his cutter, his sinker, and his four-seam fastball very frequently, but then he doesn't use his nasty stuff. He doesn't use his curveball and his changeup very much against them. And with that kind of platoon advantage, right against right, despite the fact that he's throwing his worst pitches more often, he's getting poorer contact on those pitches, but he's not striking them out because those pitches, the sinker, the fastball, and the cutter, don't have high whiff rates. However, against lefties, he's throwing his changeup 33% of the time, which is much more than the 17.7% of the time that he's throwing against righties, twice as much. And he's getting great whiff rates, so he's striking folks out at a higher rate. He's also throwing his curveball a little bit more, so he's basically just using his best two pitches a little bit more against left-handed hitters. And so you might imagine that the reason why he's doing that because he gets poor results against right-handed hitters. And naturally, most pitchers are less inclined to use a same-sided matchup changeup, i.e. a right-handed pitcher versus a right-handed hitter changeup, or a left-handed pitcher versus a left-handed hitter changeup. But he's getting great results on his changeup against same-sided hitters. And same thing with his curveball. So I'm interested to see if he picks up on that and if he starts using those pitches, which are his best pitches, more often against right-handed hitters. And thus, if he, against all right-handed hitters, goes from a 6.4 Ks per nine up even to an 8 Ks per nine, and as high as a 9 or 10 Ks per nine that he's getting against lefties, suddenly he's a much better pitcher overall. And I would say that probably that's just the best strategy to use for him, is to use his best pitchers against his best pitches against everybody, not just against left-handed hitters.
Well,
so we'll see. I bet that's a change he made.
If there's one thing that we can count on, it's that Nick Martinez is going to be studying this. He's going to be studying it in concert with Ruben Niebla, the Padres pitching coach. I think between the two of them, they're going to be incredibly in flux, not only with pregame strategy, but with I think also one thing we haven't touched on yet is that Nick Martinez, with the pitch clock, is like a beast. Like in spring training, he was pitching that first game where we saw like the giant pitch clock in the corner of the screen, and everyone was like, "Oh no, this is terrible. This is ruining baseball." Anyway, I think that you see him firing pitches off with like 12 seconds left on the clock, and I think especially in the first part of the season when batters are still going to be getting used to it, I think you're going to see him benefit from that a lot. And another thing that I am really intrigued about is the two-way pitch comm that is now happening. And we're going to, depending on who Nick Martinez is working with, but he's someone who I wouldn't put it past him making in-game strategy changes based off of, who they're facing and working in concert with Ruben Niebla to do stuff not only on a game-by-game basis, but on an inning-by-inning and a batter-by-batter basis. So, super exciting pitcher. I love when someone really is a student of their craft and really tries to better themselves and has a great understanding of who they are as a player. So with that in mind, this brings us to our final part of the podcast. This is interesting because this is the first one we've done it a player who has not hit free agency yet, or first time we've done it with a player who has hit free agency already and has signed a contract of his own volition. So we don't quite have that, Mary, so to speak, of, the extension, the kill of trade away, the fuck of use while cheap. And, we have Nick Martinez, who has this really interesting contract structure. So I was thinking for this one, we can have the option being sign long-term, sign even longer than we have now. We can have the Mary, so to speak, of use the club option that we have. So take the 2-year, $16 million a year option, or trade him away. So with that in mind, for me, I am not wanting to trade Nick Martinez away because we don't have the depth, like pitching wise. And I think that I would marry this man. I would marry Nick Martinez. I would marry those tree trunk legs of his. I would probably get him a different tailor, but I would marry him and I would exercise that 2-year, $16 million a year after this year for a couple reasons. One, like I said, we're kind of a little bit screwed when it comes to pitching depth coming up to the system. This is something that's been well established. Another reason is that I think that the market next year is a big unknown. Obviously, we're going to have Ohtani up front dominating it, not only from a hitting standpoint, but also from a pitching standpoint. And I like the idea of known risk. So I like the idea of, hey, like we know that we are going to get Nick Martinez at a certain cost control. If we were to let Nick Martinez, use his option potentially, we might lose him for a lot more money, or even for a potentially longer term deal at a reasonable amount. I'm not willing to go past that. I'm not willing to sign Nick Martinez for a longer term because, like we said, he's in his 30s already, and pitchers break down, as evidenced by Craig Stammen and who's very old, mind you. But not everyone can be Yu Darvish. Not everyone can just be constantly, finding ways to extend the life of their career. So that is what I would say. I'm marrying Nick Martinez. I am ponying up for that club option at 2 years, $16 million per. John, what are you doing with Nick Martinez?
Yeah, he's tough. So $16 million a year is going to buy you a pretty starter on the free agent market. He is somebody who, one, will take in information and adjust. He has shown that to be the case, which is always something good to have on any kind of long-term commitment. If you're going to commit to somebody for a couple years and they have shown a proclivity to take in information and change what they're doing in order to keep up with the pace of the game, then that's a better commitment, right? Because he's not going to suddenly fall off because he's outdated as a pitcher. Not only that, but he has room for growth overall. At least when I look at his profile, I think that he could be much better against right-handed hitters. And if he were much better against right-handed hitters, use his better pitches more often against those right-handed hitters, overall his numbers could improve. Also, he could be a starting pitcher, and starting pitchers are just more valuable overall. So can he get to that 2-WAR, 3-WAR range wherein a $16 million contract would be beneficial, it'd be worth it? Yeah, he could. It kind of depends, though, on what our financial situation looks like next year, because I feel as though we're going to want to keep the AAV down. And there might be some kind of talk in the works where, yeah, we'll give you that $32 million guaranteed over some longer period of time, or, keep the same amount of money, but extend it to keep AAVs down. I think he'd probably be willing to come to the table for that. I think if he proves himself over the course of an entire year and he's a good pitcher, then we're less likely to exercise the option than we are to say, we'll make it worth your while if you sign another contract with us that maybe gives you a little bit more security for a longer period of time, but keeps the AAV at something more reasonable, because it seems like that's something we're trying to target overall with all of our contracts. So I would marry him, but maybe under different parameters of a contract.
It seems like you maybe want some more of an open marriage sort of thing. You bring someone else to spice it up. I also like the idea of this contract options fractal, where there's just every year we just break the option and extend him with more options, and it goes on and on and on for infinity.
Well, if you're a player, you kind of want that, because one of the things that you're scared of is getting injured and then not making any money, right? And so every single year he knows that he's going to make money. He has insurance against his own injury, which is nice. And at least he's going to make $10 million this year. That's at the very least. That's a good amount. And on our end, we're keeping AAV down in exchange for basically giving him an insurance policy against injury. That seems like a fair exchange.
I highly look forward to the day when Rob Manfred and Dick Monfort and the rest of that economic reform committee strike down this AJ Preller masterclass type contract in the future, because it's just making it not fun enough for the other owners. You know what I mean? Keeping the cost of labor down. Anyway, this has been a blast. Nick Martinez, super interesting player. I'm like really looking forward to watching him in a Padres uniform this year, because I don't know where he's going to pitch, if he's a starter, if he's in the bullpen. Like, I don't know how he's going to pitch. I don't know for how long he's going to pitch. I don't know what his contract is going to be, but I can guarantee you that Nick Martinez will be paying a lot of attention to all of the minutia of that, and that is what makes him so fascinating. So for John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. This has been episode 3 of Pods Above Replacement. Once again, we're part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. You can become a Patreon member, get the show ad-free, participate in our Discord conversations, talk with John and I about who you want to see next on the show at patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video if you are watching on YouTube. Tell all your friends because we're trying to grow. We're trying to kind of find our stride in this new media platform, both for us and for this network. So we'll look forward to seeing you back here next time for another player. Don't forget to comment below about who you'd like to see. So for John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. Thanks for listening to Pods Above Replacement.